Today is October the 23rd, 2018. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and today with me is Larry Caldwell, retired NRCS engineer, and we're going to be speaking with Ron Clark, former state conservationist for Oklahoma, 1995 through the early part of 2000.
December 31st, 1999.
So close.
Is what I have it.
Okay. And this is part of our Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, and it's a collaborative effort between the Oklahoma Conservation History Society, the Natural Resources Conservation Services, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at OSU. So thank you for coming today.
I'm glad to be here.
Let's begin with learning when and where you were born.
Oh, let's see, I was born in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, Creek County, and I was born in 1940, August 31st.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your parents.
I've got some things to talk about with my parents.
Okay, let's hear them.
My mother was, I was born when my mother was 16 years old. And my dad, I think, was like, I think he's probably 21. But I never knew my dad. He was killed in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II in December the 29th, 1944. So I was only 4 years old when my dad died. So Mom was a widow with my brother and I. He was 15 months younger than I am. So she's a widow at 20 years old with 2 kids. And so, thank goodness, you know, she had a big family. She was one of 8 kids, you know, my grandma and grandpa had. And all those uncles and aunts, they stepped in and helped her with the 2 of us. And my grandparents, her mom and dad, stepped in and really helped, you know, as far as raising my brother and I. So she did, she got some good help, you know, because she was a widow. She got some help from the Defense Department, you know, as financially. And she also got, because we were orphans, I think she got some financial help. But still, she had to go to work. And she claimed to be one of the Rosie the Riveter types. You know, she worked in that until the war effort closed. And and then Mom, she worked different jobs, you know, as waitresses and, you know, as store clerks and that type of thing. I can remember my grandparents taking my brother in, you know, to see her on, you know, during the week and weekends and that kind of stuff. So. But she always worked hard, and she retired as a meat wrapper with Warehouse Market. She was working in a store across the street from the Warehouse Market in Sapulpa, and you know, the guys would come across the street, and she got acquainted with them, you know, just visiting. And so they invited her over, you know, to learn the meat wrapping trade. And you know, it really helped. I mean, that was a big financial boost for her, you know, to be a meat wrapper with Warehouse Market. So I was proud of my mom.
And did you live in the house with her parents then, or did you live separately?
Well, we lived in the parents. We lived with my grandparents until I started to school. You know, I was 6 years old, so about 2 years we lived with them. And they lived so far out in the country that Mom was afraid that, you know, that we wouldn't get to school. And so she bought a house in Sapulpa, and she brought us back into Sapulpa so that both of us could go to school. But it happened, you know, when I was 6 years old. In the meantime, Mom had gotten remarried, you know. And his name was Vernon Martin. He was a body and fender repairman, you know, worked on wreck cars and that kind of stuff. And, you know, he died at 38 years old.
Widow again.
Bad heart. Widow again, And I've very much respected Vern. He was good to my brother and I, and he's good to my mom. And he worked hard. But I was very glad that he was not my dad with his heart. That's, what was the question?
No, you're fine. Where did you live? So take us through your schooling. Where did you go to elementary school?
Oh, we started school. That's another thing. I moved all over Creek County. And I don't know why, the stepdad loved to move, but we'd be in a place 2 years max, and he'd want to move, and we moved around the county, out in the countryside. And so the first 2 years I was in Sepulpa. The next 2 years I was down at Kellyville. The next 2 years I went back to Sepulpa. The next 2 years I think I was at Kiefer. When he passed away, we were in Olive School District. And I was back in Sepulpa, and then I was back in Kellyville. So I knew a lot of kids in Creek County.
So where did you graduate high school?
In Kellyville.
Kellyville. And what year would that have been?
1958.
58.
I love to play sports, and I played, all the sports that were available in school. But I was my junior year, I went to Sepulpa High School. That's a big school, compared to what, I was used to at Kellyville. I graduated in the class of 22, but Sepulpa was much, much bigger. And, there was a lot more competition to make the starting point guard, on the basketball team. And so I could see in the cards that I was not going to be the starting point guard, on the basketball team. But I knew if I went to Kellyville, I could be the starting point guard on the basketball team. And so I had, my grandparents still lived in the Kellyville School District. And, they were getting elderly. And so I reported to Kellyville, the start of the school year. And I knew the superintendent down there, he was Mr. Welton. He came in, he saw me sitting there, in the room. He come over and sit down beside me, and he said, Ron, he said, what are you doing here? I said, I want to graduate from Kellyville. He looked at me and he said, I'll be right back. And I told him this story about my grandparents needing some help out there, and I was going to live with them, It's kind of, and I did some, but, I don't tell lies, but that was a little bit of a white lie.
Just stretched it.
I stretched it just a little bit. I had to have some excuse, and some reason, to go to Kellyville. Besides, trying to make the starting point guard in the basketball team. But he said, I'll be right back. And he came back in, within the time that we were in that room. And he said, you're in. He said, you can go to Kellyville. He said, I got a release from Sepulpa. So, worked out.
Well, besides sports, were you involved with 4-H or FFA or anything like that?
A little bit with 4-H, in younger years, but I really enjoyed the outdoors. I enjoyed my grandparents. He was a pumper, oil lease pumper for Jackson Oil Company. And he lived off of Highway 33, going from Drumright over to Sepulpa, about halfway there. He lived about 3 miles north up there, and it was just a bumpy old, road in there. It wasn't maintained at all by the county, nothing. But anyway, as part of this, I think as part of his payments, he had access to several hundred acres. Land was cheap in those days. But a lot of it was bottom land, and he did some farming, and like all folks those days, they had chickens and hogs and you know, everything you can imagine, you know. And he tried to make a little money off of everything, because Jackson Oil Company didn't pay a big salary, but he sold hogs, he sold cattle, you know, he milked cows, he sold milk. And so, you know, I got involved in that, not before I was 6 years old, but going out there and visiting with my granddad, and I love to go out there and be with those. He was basically my father figure, my granddad. So I had great grandparents. On my father's side, we just kind of, I don't know what it is, but you just kind of lose contact with, you know, the father's side. So didn't see much of them, but her 8, well, she was one of 8 brothers and sisters. She had 3 brothers and 5 sisters. There was 5 of the girls. She had 4 sisters. But they were very good, my brother and I.
Well, did he let you drive the tractor?
Well, in those days, Grandma and Grandpa didn't have. We had horses.
Okay.
And so we plowed with horses. And, yeah.
Did he practice any conservation measures at that point that you were aware of? No.
Well, the only thing I can remember is he had a big garden. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a hotbed or not. You know what a hotbed is, Larry? But you know, he would raise his own seedlings, you know, like tomatoes and whatever. And I think you'd put cow manure in there, I think, in order to get these seedlings going and have some increased heat. That's the reason they called it a hotbed, I think. I don't remember any other conservation. What I remember out there on that oil lease is it was just the reverse of that, and the way that they treated that land out there. I mean, it makes an impression on you. You know, those tank batteries would run over, and they'd be on the side of a hill, whole hillside, you know, several acres down there would just be denuded. You know, you just see the salt and the oil like that. I can remember going down on the creek, and all the oil wells, you know, they produced a certain amount of salt water, and it seemed like they'd have a pond, not much bigger than this conference room, and they'd have all of these pipes coming into this pond, and this salt water going into the pond, and you could see it spilling over and going into the creek. And for several miles down the creek, you know, wildlife couldn't use the water, cattle couldn't drink the water. I mean, so it was just the reverse of conservation, what I witnessed out there on this place.
Have you been back to that area today and see what it looks like now? Is it healed up?
No, it has healed up. They're no longer able to do that. I'm sure that, you know, with that program that they've got, they've probably done some work out there. But I hope they've done some work out there, because it badly needed it.
Have you been back to your home farms and places where you grew up?
Not really on them, or just basically to drive by and just see if they're still there, than anything else. And these were rental properties. We didn't buy them, you know, so we were just renting. But Mom did buy her house in Sepulpa, you know, and so my stepdad Vern, he talked her into selling that, you know, and start this gypsy way of life. I don't know why it was in him, but he liked to move around, and it wasn't very far. You know, you just move around the county. You just see something else down there at Kiefer or down at Olive or, you know, wherever, and we'd pack up and move. It's kind of weird.
Did your brother go with you to Kellyville your last 2 years?
No, he stayed in Spalding. Graduated in Spalding. The other thing that was down at Kellyville was 6 young ladies that I thought were the cutest ones in Creek County. And they were very friendly. You know, I'd gotten acquainted with them 2 different times. And I thought that would be neat too, you know, to go back there in my senior year and graduate with, you know, they were part of this 22. And so one of these 6 I married. And been married 57 years.
And what's her name?
Linda.
And how did she win out over the 6?
Oh, that I better not say. Because this might get back to her.
Fair enough.
No, I was very much taken with this young lady, and she was so full of energy. We still call my wife Linda Go Clark. I mean, she is a goer. She is a talker. If she'd come into this room, well, she would know you. She would know everybody in this room and know their history. She comes back from grocery shopping, and she starts telling me this story about this person that she's talked to. I said, "Who is this?" She said, "We were standing in line, you know, in checkout line down there." And she's got her whole history, and I mean, people just open up to Linda for some reason. I don't know what it is, but they do.
Was she a senior?
She's a wonderful lady.
Was she a senior the same year?
Yeah, we
Same age?
graduated.
Well, did you have a favorite subject in high school besides basketball?
Probably, you know, anything in the biology area.
Okay.
Biology.
At that point, what were you planning to do as a career or?
I
Next step?
thought when I came up to OSU that I wanted to be a veterinarian. And so Casey Davis was my, you know, he was kind of look after me, you know, and he was a professor up here. And so he enrolled me in 8 hours of chemistry because, you know, he's either going to show me that I could be a veterinarian or not, I think is what he was doing. I had never even cracked a history or a chemistry book. I had no chemistry in high school. And after that first semester and barely getting through chemistry and the work that I did, I decided that I probably wasn't going to be a veterinarian. And I started taking some classes in, you know, in business and in ag econ and, you know, in accounting, that kind of stuff. I did quite well in those classes, so I just stuck with that. That's what I got to do. Is a degree in ag econ from here.
From here.
Mm-hmm.
What year?
In 62.
62. How had you paid to come? With your coming from that type of background, did you have a scholarship or did you have to work your way through or what?
No, it was my dad again. It was called the War Orphan, and basically I had the same benefits as if he had come back from the service.
Like a GI Bill part?
GI Bill type thing. So I was very thankful, you know, for his service, and I was very thankful for my education. Basically, at OSU, I was able to graduate from here and not own a penny. And I went on that GI Bill paid for everything. Well, I worked during the summers. I worked at. I was lucky enough to get on at Liberty Glass in Sapulpa. You know, they make bottles and decorate bottles. You know, Coke bottles, milk bottles, you name it. So I headed off with a guy by the name of Bob Jones down there, and we got acquainted. And he was kind of the supervisor of, you know, everything. And I guess he liked me, I guess, and you know, I did work hard. And so he told me, and they knew I was going to school. And he told me, he said, "I'll have a job for you here. You just give me a call and I'll put you to work every summer." So I worked down there all summer.
Well, where did you live when you were on campus?
Mostly West Bennett. I had a friend that was up here in name was Sam Dunlap, still a good friend of mine. But he was a year ahead of me in school, and he talked me into moving into an apartment one year. And so that didn't, it worked out fine for that. I think it was only a semester. I said year, but I think it's only a semester. But I decided that West Bennett was more my style, so I moved back in there.
Do you remember much, or did you have a favorite spot on campus, like the student union, or did you visit the library any?
Yeah, the library. I love the library.
Are you being on it?
No, I did. I spent a lot of time at the library. I did. I enjoyed going over there and checking out books where I was taking classes and seeing some other textbooks. And it was very quiet in there. They had some nice music. It was very relaxing. So I did. I spent a lot of time in the library. But there was a place down there where you played snooker. And I spent some time in there. Sam and I spent some time in there. I can't think of the name of it, but it was across the street, upstairs. It had a snooker parlor upstairs. I don't know.
I don't
remember
even
the
know
name.
what snookers is, so.
You know what snooker is? It's kind of like pool.
Pool.
Oh, okay. Like swims? Oh, was it swims?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Spent more time there, huh? Or a little time there?
I spent a little time
Little
there.
time there.
Sam and I spent a little time there, and my grades suffered, so I decided I better get back in West Bennett. But he loved to play snooker.
Well, being interested in basketball, did you go to the games?
I went to a lot of the games. I was, on weekends, I just had to see this young lady in Creek County, So I spent a lot of time driving back and forth to Creek County because, Linda and I, we hit it off pretty well. So I needed to go see Linda on weekends. So I spent a lot of weekends, driving back and forth. But I did go to a lot of football games, a lot of the basketball games. Wrestling, I loved wrestling. I'd go to wrestling games.
What was Linda doing while you were in school?
Linda went to Drawn's business school. And she didn't go to, university, but she went to Drawn's business school. Graduated from there and went to work in banking. And so she was enjoying that and doing quite well in it. And in fact, after I'd gone to work, I was hired, down at the WP unit down in Fort Worth. And they'd sent me back up here to Oklahoma. I was training under John Meek. Remember John?
Know the name.
He was the economist at Oklahoma City on the planning staff. So I was training under John Meek. We were living in Edmond because John lived over there and we were sharing a ride, to work. But anyway, Linda had gone to work over at the bank in Edmond. And so I'd trained for like 3 months, and it was time for me to move. They're going to move me over to Okmulgee and then finally down to Chickasha. But they're going to move me and make me a permanent staff member for Oklahoma. And so I told Linda all of this, and so she told her, the people at the bank that she was going to have to move. And so I get this call, and it's the bank president. Says, is there anybody that we can talk to that will keep you in Edmond? Because we don't want to lose Linda. I said, no. I said, I don't think so. I explained to him best I could, what the situation was. And he understood. But he said, well, we're sure going to miss her. See a good future for her, in the banking industry. But when we moved over there, neither one of us knew, I guess, that she was pregnant. We'd gotten married my senior year in college, and she'd gone to work for Stillwater National Bank. And I told, we tell this story all the time. I told her, you know, we could get married my senior year, but I had my college paid for, and I couldn't afford anything else. So, you know, you got to get a job. So we came up here, and right away, you know, she got to work. She got a job at Stillwater National Bank, so we got married. So she paid for her way, and I paid for mine.
How did you get on with SCS? How'd you make that leap?
That's a story too. I had no idea what SCS was. I was in school in '62, and I thought I was going to graduate with my class, you know, in the spring. Well, my advisor, K.C. Davis, I mentioned before, he calls me into the office and he said, Ron, says, I've got some bad news. Says, you cannot graduate in the spring. He said, I and you, we're not going to say who, but one of us should have known that you needed this class way back when. And it was Rural Sociology, I'll never forget, Rural Sociology 202. And he says, you cannot graduate without, you know, having this Rural Sociology. So I wound up going to summer school, you know, to take Rural Sociology 202. And I took like 6 hours or something like that, you know, just to keep busy during the summer. But I was in this Rural Sociology class, and my Casey Davis secretary come over there, and she interrupted the class, and she, you know, the told the instructor, you know, who she wanted to see, and so she called me out the hall. She said, there is a individual over here from Soil Conservation, from SCS. She didn't say Soil Conservation Service. She said SCS, and she's interviewing for trainees, ag economist trainees. And I said, what's SCS? You know, I had no idea. And she said, well, if you're interested, we'll follow me over there, and you know, you'll conduct an interview. So I said, well, why not? You know. So I followed her over there, and his name was Les Atkinson. You remember him at all? Mm. He was the principal economist down at the ENWP unit down in Fort Worth, Texas. And he's quite a gentleman. But we sat down and talked for some time. You know, he interviewed me. And he said, well, Ron, he said, I'm going to visit, you know, some other campuses. And he said, I'll let you know in a few weeks whether or not, you know, we'll accept you as a trainee. And so I didn't think anything more about it, you know. And in a few weeks, well, I got this call from him, and he said, if you want to work for SCS, he told me what to do. He says, you need to report down the NWP unit down in Fort Worth by such and such a date. So Linda and I, you know, I think she had to stay up here for a while. I think she stayed with her mom and dad over at Kellyville. But I went down there. No, she went down there with me. I can remember us renting this little old place, and was only down there for 2 weeks. And they said, we're going to send you back out as, you know, for training under a practicing economist on planning staff. And I said, well, where are you going to send me? And he said, Oklahoma City. I said, great, you know, great. I'm glad to go back to Oklahoma City. I could have, after that 6-month period, well, I could have gone into any one of the 5 states, but it just so happened that Oklahoma lost an economist about that time. His name was Calvin Wright. You ever know him? Mm-hmm. He was a Native American, and he'd gotten an opportunity to go back and get, you know, do some graduate work at university somewhere. I don't know where it was. But anyway, he'd resigned from SES. And so at that time, I think Oklahoma had at least 4 planning staff under, doing 566 work, and 2 staffs down at Chickasha, working on the Washita. So there was a demand for staff members, and so they were short an economist. And so after that 6-month period, then they hired me. Sent me over to OOHRP, working under Tom Horton. Remember him?
Heard the name?
And Jack Clayton and James Ludwig and Sham Coppinger, some of those guys like that. And so Linda and I, we never set up housekeeping anywhere, so we bought some furniture, and her dad was helping us move into this place that we'd rented in OOHRP. Tom Horton shows up while we got the trailer backed up to the front door unloading the furniture. He shows up and he said, "Ron," he said, "I tell you this," but he said, "You've been transferred. You've been transferred to Chickasha, and we haven't even moved in the house in OOHRP, I said, "Well, when do we have to get down there?" And he said, "Oh, about 2 weeks." So we load up and go down to Chickasha.
And from there, just keep going. How many moves did you totally have to do?
I tell you what, I was very lucky on moves. I talked to people that have moved
11, 12, 13 times.
more in the teens, It's amazing. But, if you count that as a move to Fort Worth and then to Edmond, and I don't even count that as a move, back to OOHRP, but to Chickasha, then it slowed down after that. I moved from Chickasha to Phoenix. And
How long were you in Chickasha?
was there 5 years,
Right.
working mostly on the, cleanup of the Washita River. I think phase 2 or section 2 or whatever it was. And we were doing a lot of the laterals, just going in and filling in, basically where we thought that we could justify some structures. And that's what I was doing, is the economics on those. We had a full staff down there, engineers, hydrologists, geologists. I don't know if we had biologists at that time or not.
Agronomists.
Agronomists.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a full staff, and we'd go in and just see if we could justify any additional work in there for flood control and that kind of stuff. So it was just kind of a wrap up. There were some laterals there, some small ones. The Anadarko, around Anadarko, around Fort Cobb. I can remember we did some work in some of the some of the watersheds that had already had construction in, like Sugar Creek. Some of the others. We also, while I was down there, we did some work on Public Laws 566. Elk Creek. Is that a 566? That's 566.
Yes, it is.
But I did the economics on that. Very proud of that work. While I was a trainee at Oklahoma City working under John Meek, the first project I did was OOHRP Creek. I did the economics on OOHRP Creek over there.
The channel through town also?
A channel right down through the middle of town, and a multi-purpose structure up there that was that's
S1?
I've drove by that here a while back just to look at it. I've never seen it constructed. And Salt Camp Creek over at Stroud.
Were you in the office most of the time, or were you out in the field talking with farmers?
Mostly I was out in the field talking to farmers. Economists, they always talk about us having a sharp pencil, but we didn't have a sharp pencil. But it was our job, to try to scrounge out as much benefit as we could, And so we were out visiting with farmers and people that were living on the land out there, trying to get some idea of what damages that they've had for, you know, in flooding in past years. And we would take that information then, working very closely with the hydrologist. They would go back, the hydrologists go back and study, you know, the history of rain and flooding, you know. And then we could tie that all together and come up with a average annual damage. And if that average annual damage exceeded what Larry and his engineers, people like Larry, would come up with, you know, how much it's going to cost to do whatever engineers thought needed done in this watershed, you know, as far as channels and structures and that kind of stuff. You'd compare the average annual cost to the average annual benefit. And if the average annual benefit was more than the cost, then we could justify doing the work, you know, with taxpayers' money. That was my job for a lot of years.
So you talked with the farmers to find out what the damages were during different floods?
Yeah, yeah.
How much they'd be reduced if you put the dams in?
Yeah, I met a lot of farmers up and down the creeks. I met a few relatives over in Creek County, you know, working on Salt Camp Creek. I met a cousin over there. I didn't even know, you know, got to talking to her, and you know, we may be related. Sure enough, we were.
Well, would they always buy into what you were talking about before?
I never didn't run into people that were against it. I did run into one individual over at on Salt Camp Creek, and this is the only one I can remember. And it was the landowner that was underneath that structure, that multi-purpose structure. And I don't know if they were probably have to condemn the land or something, you know, in order to get it. He was very upset. But he had this house up there on the hill, and I started in to look at the site. And I saw this guy sitting on the porch up there on the hill. So I said, well, I better go up there and talk to him before I go in there. And so I drove up, you know, I introduced myself. And I said, you know, work for SCS. Just going in there to see the site. He said, well, I own that land. And he said, I'm very upset with, you know, the way things are going. And he said, see that rifle over there? He said, you would have had a hole in that pickup if you'd gone into that gate. I said, well, I'm sure glad I didn't go in that gate. But he said, since you come up here and asked, he said, just go in there and look to your heart's content, you know. And he's a very nice guy. He's just upset because, you know, they were condemning that land and he didn't like it. So, but that's, you know, I didn't run into a lot of people that were
Did you do everything primarily by hand on paper, or you didn't have computers yet at that time, or were you starting to get into some of the computers?
Yeah, we didn't know what a computer was at that time.
You didn't have the TR-20s and the Econ 2s
No,
and programs?
tablets, nothing like that. No, I tell this story all the time too, but you know, when you come to college, you see new and different things. And I can remember seeing my first calculator. And it was one of these old calculators that you'd sit on the table and it'd like this, and you know, you'd have the units, and then it'd go to tens, and they'd go to 100. You know, you ever seen one of those? That's the first, and I thought that was marvelous. I could not believe you could have a machine that could add, divide, subtract.
Was that a Frieden? One of those that was about this
It
square?
wasn't very big. I mean, it was just small. But that thing would just sit there and it'd just buzz, you know, on you know, when it was calculating the, you know, the different, you know, go all the way through units, all the way up wherever you were need to go in order to add or subtract, divide, and multiply. But no, the first computer, on computers, you know, I told you that I'd taken some outside classes, and I took all the management courses that NRCS and USDA have, the interagency, you know, you name it. I mean, even outside the agency, I took management classes. But the one that probably got me the most was a little Fortran Programming class that I took at Oklahoma College for Women down at Chickasha. I didn't know anything about computers, you know, but I saw this thing being offered, you know. And so I went out there and I enrolled in Fortran Programming. And I don't know if I learned anything or not, but anyway, I took the course. And it was on my resume, you know, my records. And so this guy, he told me when I took the job out in Phoenix, he said, Ron, he said, you know, they send you a list and kind of a resume of each of these individuals, you know. And you can pick and choose whoever you want. You might have 4 or 5 people on this list, you know, that you can choose. And he said, you know, the reason that I asked you to come to Phoenix? I said, no, Jerry. His name is Jerry Wells. I said, no, Jerry, I have no idea. He said, because you took that Fortran programming course in Chickasha. And he thought, well, you know, maybe I was, you know, I don't know what he thought, but anyway, that's the reason that I wound up going from Oklahoma out to Phoenix.
Were you on a planning staff there too, watershed planning staff in Phoenix?
I went out there as, well, I got a promotion to go out there. Got my 12. But that was kind of weird too, because, you know, I got acquainted with Herb Previtt. Mm-hmm. Herb Previtt was my boss when I got down to Chickasha, and later Tom Horton when Herb came in here. So I counted Herb as a good friend. He took Linda and I under our wings, you know, under his wings. You know, we got down there and he showed us around town. And there was a guy down there by the name of Vernon Martin. Mm-hmm. Remember Vernon?
Oh, nice.
He was the economist that I was supposed to be replacing on the staff. But Vernon went on to be a regional conservationist. Mm-hmm. I think he worked in the national headquarters in some you know, some top positions.
Nice man.
Very nice man.
Mm-hmm.
Vern and Judy.
Mm-hmm.
But we got, this is kind of rambling, but that's okay, I guess. But anyway, get down to Chickasha, and Herb says, well, you and Linda get in the car, and so I'll show you around Chickasha. And he said, Vernon and Judy own a place out here. He said, let's go out there and look at it. It's for sale. And I said, how much is it? $16,000 for a house with 2 acres. You know, that was a lot back in those days. But Linda and I hit lucky in that while I was 6 months in training, I was on 7-day-a-week per dime. Mm-hmm. Per dime wasn't much those days, but it was like $10 a day, and this was not even taxable. And so we lived off of my salary, and we put that money aside, you know, and so we had enough, you know, to you know, think about buying a house. But anyway, we go out there and we meet Vernon Martin and Judy, and they're nice people, and they show us this house, you know, and how much they're wanting for it. And I said, I told Herb, you know, how much we had in the bank. He said, I think that'll make a down payment on this house if you wanna think about buying it. Well, in the short run, we wound up buying that house, and it was a beautiful house sitting out there on 2 acres, great big trees, pecan trees around it. I couldn't believe we were lucky enough to get that house. But the other story, then I'll get off Vernon. But I can remember being out on one of those where Vernon had done some of the preliminary work, you know, on a Public Law 566 project or a Washita project. I can't remember which one it was, but anyway. Herb had taken me out there, and we were going to talk to the local people. And so Herb had gotten up there and done his always does a good job, you know, of introducing and talking to them, you know. Herb was very good in front of a crowd. But then he introduced me, and I was talking to him a little bit about the economics and what I did and this and that. And I made the mistake of saying that, you know, right up front, that I'm Ron Clark, and I have replaced Vernon Martin on the planning staff over at Chickasha. And so this old farmer, he raised his hand back, and he said, "Boy," he said, "it'll be a while before you replace Vernon Martin."
Put you in your
So I
place.
never said that again. It'll be a while before you replace Vernon Martin. Yeah, I took that literally, but Vernon was quite a guy. And Herb Previtt, I always enjoyed Herb.
What was your position in Phoenix?
I went out there, we were doing a Type 1 river basin study. And that was big back during those days. There were several of them going on. It was an interagency study. Not only all the USDA agencies, but the Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Fish and Wildlife Service, you name all the federal agencies, and they were involved in this.
That would have been, what, early 70s?
I went out there in '68, and it was underway. So, yeah, it was probably a 2.5, 3 year study. And it was quite interesting. I think that was, you know, when I think about Arizona and what I accomplished in Arizona, I think I was very proud of the work that we did on that. But here you are, just a small town kid, you know, never even hardly been out of the Creek County, you know, and here you are going to Phoenix and having meetings in Los Angeles and Las Vegas and places like that. You know, you feel a little lost for a while, but you know, finally get groove. But this, I think it was from all the drainage area from Glen Canyon Dam, which is in Utah, all the way to the Mexico border. So it included, you know, a lot of the states down there. It was all the drainage into the Colorado River. So it extended over into Arizona, over into California.
Did that include Phoenix or not?
We were headquartered in Phoenix, yeah.
But did the drainage area, the study area include Phoenix?
Oh, yeah, it included Phoenix.
White tanks
Yeah,
area?
all that.
Buckeye?
All that. Yeah, it included Salt River came through Phoenix, Gila River came through Phoenix, and they all run into the, I better double check that, but I'm pretty sure they run into the Colorado River. But this, like I say, this was 2.5, 3 year study, and I was the economist on a staff, on a planning staff, and it had engineers, it had hydrologists, it had biologists, it had soil scientists. It had basically very much like a Public Law 566 project. We had the same staff, but these were folks from all over the country, you know. Had the engineer was from Ohio, Cliff McGuire. You ever know Cliff? He was the engineer. Milner, he was the geologist. I don't know. Paycheck, Carl Paycheck, he was kind of our soil conservationist type thing. But you had a different types of individuals on this staff. And so the study was broken down into about 13 different areas. And these areas were, you know, one of the big ones was flood control, you know. And what we were doing is looking at the current resources in this big vast area, millions of acres, and the condition of those resources, what it would take, you know, in order to conserve or, you know, repair some of these resources, and what it would cost, and whether or not it was economically feasible to do some of this work. It's much like a Public Law 566 project, but on a much bigger scale, and without as much data. I'll guarantee you, because a lot of it had to be judgment. You know, just looking at maps and doing a little telemetering and figuring out, you know, percentages and that kind of stuff. But we did the best we could as far as coming up with, you know, as reliable information as we could. But it had 13 appendix, and they were on things like flood control, land resources, water resources, recreation, fish and wildlife, you know, and on and on and on and on on the resources in that area. And they had for each one of those resources, they had a work group. And this was an interagency work group. And for instance, on flood control, I was on that one. They had NRCS, because the agencies that were basically involved in flood control, you know, Bureau of Reclamation, the Corps of Engineers. And, you know, we had some of the environmental groups, you know, like Fish and Wildlife Service. And we had representatives of those. And some of those groups, we even had state representation. You know, people from, you know, Arizona or California or whoever. And so we would get together, and they would be somebody that was chairing this group, man or woman, whoever it was. And and we'd decide, you know, how are we going to tackle this issue. And then they'd make assignments out to each one of us. And this was our job. And we were going to have this job done by a certain date. And we're going to get back together then, and you're going to show us what you came up with, each one of you. And then, you know, we're going to put all this together and then decide where we need to go from there, you know, and just keep progressively, you know, trying to work toward an end, which is what we discussed earlier, you know. What's the resources out there? What's the condition of those resources? And what do we need to do to conserve and improve those resources? Well, we get through that process, and then there is a main report to write, you know, to take all of this information and condense it into a main report like this. And so they had a representative of USDA, they had a representative of the Bureau of Reclamation, they had a representative of the Corps of Engineers. And who do you think they selected to represent USDA to write this main report? So I thought that was quite an honor. And so we worked, you know, the three of us, we'd get together and we'd go through the same process, you know. You write this chapter and I'll work on the next chapter, and, you know, we spent, you know, 2 or 3 months writing this main report.
Typewriters at that point, I guess, wasn't it?
Huh?
Typewriters at that point instead of computers.
Well, we had secretary.
Oh, yeah, well,
We'd write it out longhand, both sides.
okay.
I did, in high school, I did take typewriting. I got a 40 word pen, but my typewriting now is like a bumblebee, you know. But I get a finished product. It just takes a little longer. But, you know, I enjoyed that, you know, the work on that Type 1 river basin study. It was a new experience. I think it broadened my horizons, you know, being in there with all these other agencies and all these other people. You know, you meet some great people. In fact, Larry, you'll appreciate this. You remember Burke Snyder worked down at Chickasha?
Yeah.
You know, I got acquainted him down at Chickasha. The chairman of the work group for the flood control worked for the Corps of Engineers out of LA. And the first time I met him, he introduced himself, and his name was Burke Snyder. I said, you know, I work with a Burke Snyder in Chickasha. He said, he's my brother.
Oh my gosh.
So, you know, it's a small world, but yeah, he's my brother. What was Clarence? Was it Clarence Burke Snyder? One of them's name was Clarence. I can remember that, but it may have been the guy out that worked for the Corps. But I met some wonderful people, very knowledgeable people, you know, that help, you know, like I say, I didn't know much of the world, and when I got ready to when I got ready to leave Oklahoma, you know, like I say, I'd gotten very well acquainted with Herb Previtt, and so Herb's the one that called me, and he told me I'd had this job offer out in Phoenix. He didn't think I'd take it, and so I called him and told him that I thought I'd take that job. And so the next morning I get a call from Herb. He said, Ron, he says, I don't think you ought to take that job. he said, what we'll do, he says, I'll make you state economist. And he says, I'll give you your GS-12 here. I'll give you your promotion here if you'll just tell them no out there. And I said, Herb, I've already told him yes. And he said, well, he says, I think I can get you out of that. I said, Herb, you know, it's a big world out there. And I said, I'd just like to go see some of it. I think I'm going to go to Phoenix. He said, okay. So I went to Phoenix, dragging Linda and 2 babies. I mean, our little girl wasn't even walking when we took off out there.
Dragon, Linda didn't want to go.
Oh, Linda went. She's never said no to me anything.
So how long were you there in Phoenix?
10 years.
Oh.
And I moved up through economist on the planning staff. And then they selected me as not River Basin, as watershed staff leader. And I'd have to look at my notes, but I think that was like in about 1974. So I left being an economist, you know, and I graduated in '62, and I worked here in Oklahoma 5 years, and I worked out there until, I think it was, I got out there in '68, and I left in '78. And I think it was about 1974 they offered me a management position, basically a watershed staff leader, 566. And I worked that for about a year, and Cliff McGuire took off to either national headquarters. I think he was also a state conservationist in Ohio, so he went one or the other. But I think he went into national headquarters, but he was my boss, and he left, and they offered me then the river basin and watershed. We'd done the type 1, but we were doing what they call type 4, smaller river basin studies, you know, like Santa Cruz and some of those. It was much smaller scale, but it was doing some of the same thing. But they offered me the river basin and watershed staff leader job, and I think I was in that. Then I was in that job until I left in '78. But they offered me a promotion then as the river basin watershed staff leader job. Got my 13. So I did that until '98, and I got acquainted with an individual there in Arizona. His name was Denny Burns. You ever know Denny?
Oh, yes.
Denny and I became good friends. You know, we weren't working together, basically. He was working in engineering and watershed, and I was in river basin. But Denny and I had kids, you know, they're about the same age. And we just got to doing things. We got to socializing together. We got fishing and hunting together, and you know, having dinner on weekends with, you know, together, and that kind of thing. And so I got very well acquainted with Denny and Darla and their kids. We'd go down to Mexico, down Baja, California. This was Thanksgiving, and you know, all of us were away from our families, Denny was actually born in Oklahoma. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
He's down in the southeast somewhere. But I think he spent most of his time in Washington or Oregon, you know, growing up. But he was born in Oklahoma. I don't think he stayed here very long. But we go down to, there was several of us in the office. We just, almost like an open house. Some of us are going down to Baja, you know, and we went down to a place called Keno Bay. There was Old Keno and New Keno. But people had made investments in big apartments down there, very nice apartments, you know, condo type things. And so we'd just rent those condos, and whoever wanted to go down there, we would mostly fish and sightsee, and I think we drank a beer or two, but but anyway, we do a lot of fishing and sightseeing, and it was fun, you know, having everybody down there. We even talked to state conservationists in Arizona going down there. George Marks ended up going down there with us one year. But we'd play tricks on each other. Denny and I, we thought it would be funny one time to, Denny and Darla, we were all staying in different bedrooms, of course, but we were fishing, and there was a place there that you could buy fish. So we bought some old rough fish, and of course fish were dead, and they were in gunny sacks. You can imagine after a while what they smell like. But we'd cut those up and use them for fish bait, you know, and doing quite well catching fish. But Denny and I, after one beer, we thought it'd be a good trick to put that gunny sack under Cliff McGuire and Shirley's bed. And so we did that, and so we couldn't wait till the next morning to go there and hear what had happened, you know, in that room. And so Cliff, he's in the lead, you know. I mean, Denny's in the lead. We go over there, and dirty clothes are out in the yard. You know, you can't imagine what was out. I mean, they could not find this stinking mess in this room. And so you can imagine what kind of night they'd had. And they were not in a good mood. They were not in a good mood. You know, they hadn't had any sleep. And Denny, you know, he's a good Samaritan. He found his sack underneath their bed after we had put it under there. He knew exactly where it was. But he found it. And Cliff put two and two together. He thought, I know who put that sack underneath my bed. So we get back to Phoenix, and it's hot. It's always warm in Phoenix, you know. But Denny's very, very, you know, he's very proud of all of his fishing equipment. He's got tackle boxes like this. He got everything but the kitchen sink in those tackle boxes. Spent no telling how much money, you know, to equip this tackle box. So he opens up his tackle box after many weeks, and he finds that gunny sack with those fish. So Ron, he gets off scot-clean, you know. Cliff would never think that Ron would be involved in something like that. So, but Denny Burns suffered the consequences. But you know, became very good friends with all those key people, but especially Denny Burns. Denny is still a very good friend of mine, but I followed him into the watershed staff leader position. I followed him into the River Basin watershed staff leader position. He took off to Wyoming as the assistant for water resources, and he's only up there a short time, and he got called into the national headquarters. And I know that he had a big influence in me getting a call saying, would you like to come up here and be the assistant for water resources in Wyoming? So, you know, I just kind of got in his tailwind, and he helped me a great deal as far as my career in RCS.
So you moved to Casper then, huh?
Yeah, Denny was in Casper for a while. He was the assistant for water resources.
But then you went there too? You went to Casper too?
Oh, yeah,
How long were you there?
10 years.
Oh,
And so that's the reason I'm saying I didn't move around a lot. I was in Phoenix for 10 years. I was in Casper for 10 years. I was in North Dakota for 8 years. And then I came back down here. So, you know, after I got through my initial moves, well, I only moved 3 times. And that's pretty unusual.
Amazing at that time, yeah.
Yeah, for that.
Did some projects come out of that River Basin study that ended up being implemented?
No, these weren't implemental. I mean, they were able to identify where there might be potential for Public Law 566 projects and RC&D, you know, you name it, anything that we had.
Did some of them become 566 projects then? in the
Yeah,
end?
I'm sure that they did,
Mhm.
you know. But have you ever seen some of those projects around Phoenix? You mentioned
yes.
White Tanks,
Buckeye,
Buckeye,
Medina.
Mesa I'm losing, but there's a whole string of Public Law 566 projects around Phoenix. Runs all the way from the Salt River down to the Gila River, and then, you know, around on the other side, where the Central Arizona project came in. But that was when I was working as the I can't remember if it was the watershed staff leader or the River Basin watershed staff leader, but we had this was after NEPA came in, you know, the National Environmental Policy Act came in, which changed the work in RCS and SCS drastically. I mean, when you started having to do environmental impact statements and that. But there's a whole ring of projects all the way around Phoenix, especially on the west side, coming off the Superstition Mountains. And they almost look like landfills out there. I mean, they're not that tall. Some of those structures are not much taller than, well, they're probably taller than that, you know, that wall, but they're not very tall for a dam. But they run for miles. I mean, you can't even see one end to the other of these things. They're like a big diversion. And the water is collected and then stored, and then, you know, and regulated, you know, regulated flow then is taking it down to like the Gila River. That's where all the water from that string of structures went. But the final phase of this was a big floodway that we were supposed to collect all of that water, you know, from the runoff, the intervening area, plus the structures themselves, and get that water safely from the intervening area plus the structures all the way down to the Gila River. And have you ever seen that floodway that we built out there?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty good size.
It's huge.
It's a big floodway. I don't know, I'd say it's probably at least 50. I mean, there's ball fields down in the bottom of that thing. You know, that's how big that thing was.
You never believe water would ever.
You'd never
Get it.
believe, no. I mean, they developed it into parks and that kind of stuff. You know, got amphitheaters and, you know, everything else down in the bottom of this. But that's the reason that it was built. And I was the staff leader that led that effort to plan that and
Really?
and come up with the, you know, certainly not the construction plans, but, you know, led the effort to develop a plan so that we could construct that thing.
Well, all those dams and all that work that was done back at that time, we're now rehabilitating all of those dams today.
Are you really?
We're rebuilding
that's-
all of
that's
those.
super. That is
Have they come, has there been a flood that used,
I don't know many. I don't know many.
Well, there's been a couple that are, you'd never believe water would ever be down there. And that's part of the problem, because houses were built in some of the areas too, and they were built in the floodway.
Well, you can imagine, you know, if you got native native land out there. You get rain on it, their infiltration rate is certain rate, you know, and it's much slower than if you got roofs and sidewalks and driveways and streets. You know, there's no runoff. I mean, it's 100% runoff on those. So, you know, that affects design too. I mean, and that area that was what I call the intervening area between the structure and that floodway is probably now, you know, a big percent of it is in roofs and sidewalks and streets and that kind of stuff. So, you know, that affects the amount of runoff and the rate of runoff too. So, but, you know, that's just, I think that was one of the main accomplishments too, is you know, leading that effort to come up with that.
And Maricopa County has
plan.
one of the best flood control alert systems in the nation there because of the water comes in areas people don't anticipate. And that's what it was based upon. The work that you all did there was the beginning of that.
Well, and on the other side was the white tanks, wasn't it? I didn't do any work on that one. That one's already done when I got down there, but
Up by Goodyear.
was it? Yeah.
Well, what prompted your decision to move on to the next locale?
No, next locale.
Something new, or?
No, I don't know. After you, I'm one that after I do a job a certain length of time, you know, I'd like to do something else.
Was it was a promotion going to Wyoming?
Not really.
Not
No, it
to
wasn't a
Wyoming?
promotion to go from Phoenix to Wyoming. I'd already got my 13 there as rural Basin watershed staff leader, and that was 13 up there. But you know, if you don't have some of these other things, you know, like assistant jobs under your belt, then it's very rare. That at that time anyway. I don't know where it is now, but you know, you had to have those jobs under your belt in order to become, you know, to move on up the ladder, you know, to get promotions and that kind of stuff.
So your promotion would have come from Laramie to North Dakota, wherever the next
My
one was?
promotion actually came from Arizona, and I went from. I had a interesting individual. I just love this guy too. I love everybody I work with, but he was my boss in Wyoming. His name was Frank Dixon, and Frank was an ex-Marine, and you know, he was a fun guy to work for. He's a fun guy to be around, and you know, I got acquainted with his family, you know, his wife and his kids, and we tried a little hunting and fishing and that kind of stuff, and going over on Sunday afternoon, you know, and having dinner together and that kind of stuff. So I got very well acquainted with Frank and Yvonne, and they're still our dear friends. You know, he retired into it's Nevada. Is it Sparks? Sparks.
Reno?
I don't. That doesn't sound right, but it's pretty close to Las Vegas. Just over across, close to the Utah border.
Not too far from Reno, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. But they're retired up there. But I work for you know, other people up there. But the main one I worked for up there was Frank Dixon, and he was an ex-Marine. And we had a guy up there, his name was Lon Young. He was the state agronomist. And Lon Young had a wit about him that I haven't seen in very many people, but he's, you know, he'd just keep you laughing. But I can remember he would introduce Frank, you know, and this is the big boss, you know, in the state. I can remember Frank was the speaker, and he's going to introduce him. And so he introduced Frank, and he said, Frank, you know, is an ex-Marine. And Frank was a weightlifter, you know, he still kept his body in shape, and he didn't have any neck. He went from his ears right straight down here, you know, he just, and Lon says, you'll notice Frank doesn't have any neck. So, he says he's an ex-Marine, and he said he lost his neck from jumping out of that top bunk head first. He said all Marines do that. But that was Lon. But Frank had this deal of he wanted you to learn the business, and so all the time I went up to Wyoming as the assistant for water resources, and that's basically all I'd ever worked in, you know. And this was, I went up there in '78, I guess, yeah, '78. And that's all I'd ever worked in is water resources, you know, Public Law 566 and river basins. And so I went up there as assistant for water resources, and that's what I had up there for some time, you know, about the first 4 or 5 years. I was in charge of 566. We didn't do any river basins up there that I can recall. But Frank had this thing, he wanted you to learn the business. So, I mean, on, you know, the first Monday after the new year, well, he might come into a staff meeting and he'd say, okay, this year, instead of water resources, you're going to be an assistant for operations. And you're going to be the assistant for water resources. I said, Frank, I don't know anything about operations. I don't know anything about, you know, I've never worked in a field office. I don't know anything about working in a field office. He said, Vaughn, it's time you learned. And so I very much appreciated that with Frank, because, you know, it expanded, you know, what I knew about SES. And
Without having to
NRCS.
relocate.
Yeah.
Without having to relocate.
That's right. And so I learned about operations in field offices and you know, operations in the whole of NRCS. So it was very helpful to me, you know, because it got me, not only, you know, it got me out of water resources. I didn't worry about that, you know, that year that I was in operations. I was very much worried about operations because I didn't know what the heck I was doing, you know. I had to learn. But thank goodness I got through it. But I very much appreciated Frank Dixon. After I went through these chairs, you know, different chairs, and he offered me the job as Deputy State Conservationist. And then I did get a promotion to 14. And I worked in as his deputy for a few years. I can't remember, 2, 3 years, whatever. But then during this time, I started getting calls from an individual in the national headquarters. His name was again Denny Burns. And I was asked to do other things, you know, like, you know, special studies and special work. Denny was going through different chairs in the national headquarters at that time. And like I got a call from him one time, and he said he was in charge of the Great Plains Conservation Program. That was under his bailiwick at the national headquarters. And he said, I need somebody to go around to all the GP states and talk to, you know, the people that are running this, working in it, get them all together and just talk about the Great Plains program and how it's going, and if there's something that needs to be changed, if there's something that we can improve. He said, I want you to accumulate all of these ideas, you know, from each state, and what we have in the Great Plains, 6 states, 8 states, something like that, but it was several. And so he asked me to do that, you know. This is my buddy Denny Burns again, so you know, giving me those kinds of opportunities, which I appreciated very much. When I got the job in North Dakota, I was on and I have no idea why he put me on this one, but it was, we were doing an engineering study. What they call those things. There was several of them that were going at that time. But it was an engineering study, and what an economist was doing on this engineering study, I had no idea. But, you know, he put me on this thing. And so after we had done the study, then we were presenting it to somebody on the Hill, you know, a congressman or senators or a group or something. But anyway, I can remember Denny and I were in the backseat of this cab, and we were going up on the Hill to you know, to present this report to this group or some congressman, senator, I don't know. But I leaned over to Denny and I said, Denny, I'm ready for a state conservationist job. And he looked at me and he said, I've got one in North Dakota. He said, you want that one? that was how I got to go to North Dakota. I just told him I was ready for a state con job.
How times have changed. Huh?
Yeah, how times have changed. He said, he was the assistant chief at that time, and he was in charge of, you know, all those states up there in the Midwest. He was the Midwest assistant chief, I think it was. And so he had that authority. He could appoint, you know, a state conservationist in North Dakota in his area of responsibility. So that's how I got the job in North Dakota. I just told him I was ready for the job. He said, I've got one in North Dakota.
When was that?
In 1988.
And did you discuss that with Linda before you said, okay, I'll take it?
Probably. Linda
That's
has
a week,
never
that's a
told
week,
me no.
probably.
She has never told me no. And especially if there was a promotion in it. She always liked those, more money. You know. We all like more money. I always told people that I never turned down a promotion.
Were you in Bismarck?
I was in Bismarck.
Mm-hmm. Was it cold?
Just in the wintertime. And that was about 8 months out here. Yes, it was cold. They had these places that you could plug your cars in.
Mm-hmm.
Even parking meters. I don't know if they went as far as parking meters downtown, but if you pulled into a motel, they had a place that you could plug your car in. And you know what a block heater is on a car? Mm-hmm. They install those in cars up there, and it's like you know, your dipstick going down into your oil. Well, they have it's something like that. If that was heated, you know, with electricity, well, that's basically what a block heater is. It just keeps your motor, you know, warmer on those cold winter nights, like in Bismarck. When it gets down to 20 degrees below zero, you go out there and that car will not start if you don't have a block heater. And so I've been known to exaggerate. It's not 8 months up there, but it's a long winter up there. I'd say at least five months. It's cold. But even in your garage at night, you would have those block heaters.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember driving to work one morning, and you know, I had a long extension on this block heater. I must have been in a rush or hadn't had my second cup of coffee or something. But I hadn't unplugged this thing. And I'm going down the street and I turn around. What is that? I'm dragging it on. It was this big long extension cord, so you know, I got out and unplugged.
Well, there's an island.
I tell you.
So you were there until you came here?
Yeah, I was there until 95. I was there from 88 through 95.
Well, not quite 10 years that go around.
And it was very nice of NRCS to let us transfer down here. That was a lateral transfer from North Dakota down here. But Linda and I both, were basically raised over there in Creek County. Neither one of us, her dad had died. Her mother was still alive in 95. And my mother was still alive in 95. Neither one of them was married. And both of them were basically living by themselves. And so we both thought it would be nice to get back down here and, be closer to them, in their later years. It'd be a big help to them, be a big help to us, just to not have to worry about them so much, just to be there so that we could help. So I heard about the job in Oklahoma being open. And I talked to, I can't remember who I talked to, but I talked to the powers that be, but finally to, I think, was it Pearlie Reed that was chief?
About
95?
About
Bill
that time.
Richards, somebody. But anyway, I finally had to get the okay from the chief of NRCS. I can't remember if it was Pearlie Reed or, no, I think it was Wilson Scaling.
Yeah.
Wilson Scaling, that's who it was.
Pearlie started in 98.
It was Wilson Scaling. And got the okay from him, and I told him what our family situation was, mine and Linda's. He understood, and he's good enough to say, yeah, you and Linda, our kids were gone by that time, we got Angie and her daughters, Angie and Tracy. They were born, Tracy was born in 64 and Angie was born in 67. He started out at Wyoming, University of Wyoming, on a baseball scholarship. You can imagine playing baseball in Wyoming. It didn't work out. They finally closed the program. They got smart. And he still wanted to play baseball, so he got an offer to play at Phillips University up at Enid. So he finished his college up there. Angie started out at the community college there in Casper Community College. Went 2 years and then went on down to Wyoming and got her teacher's degree down there. So they now have their families. Linda and I have 4 grandsons. Don't have any granddaughters. That's just the way it worked out. We'd love to have some granddaughters, but we didn't. And the oldest one now is, I think Austin's probably 24, 23, 24. The next 2 are about 21. They're both in college. One's at Montana State, and the other one's he plays golf like his dad and his granddad. He plays golf for OBU down at Shawnee. We're enjoying watching him, play golf, because the whole family goes, on some of his golfing trips. He probably gets tired of that, but but he doesn't say anything. He just keeps his mouth shut and plays his golf game. And the other one's still in high school. He's a senior up in St. Louis, Missouri. So, got a good, big family. Love all of them. They're great kids, all of them.
So do you want to get into, once you got to Oklahoma, tell us some of the things that were happening here at that time, and during your 4.5 years, what work you were doing?
Oklahoma, got down here in and things were a little bit in disarray, and I won't get into a lot of the details there, but I was proud of the fact that had a fantastic staff in the state, had a fantastic staff. That's one of the main things that I've enjoyed is getting acquainted with the people that I've worked with, the people that I've worked in the agency, that I've worked with outside the agency. You talk about accomplishments. Now that is a big accomplishment in my life, just being able to say that I've gotten acquainted with all those people. Working as a state conservationist, you go to these national meetings, and there's people from all 50 states there. And just getting acquainted with those folks, after hours, we used to have big golf tournaments and, just playing golf with them and eating dinner with them and just sitting around after work and having a beer with them and that kind of stuff. I mean, just getting acquainted with these folks. They're top notch, and so, I can say that Linda and I have, we've got friends basically in all 50 states somewhere. It was one thing that this is kind of funny, but we go to these national meetings and how I'm telling you about my wife and how she loves people and people love her. Well, she got acquainted with 8 ladies, and one of them was Darla Burns. She'd already known Darla, so she had an in there, Denny Burns' wife. But they kind of chummed around together, and they'd go shopping, and I think they even drank a little wine, maybe, I don't know. But these ladies got acquainted, all this time that I was going to these national meetings because, the wives went, most of them went anyway. After I retired, well, these 8 ladies, they decided, just because you guys retired and we're not going to that meeting, we're still going to get together. And so they have every year. It's dwindled down. They've one or two of them, like our good friend Darla Burns, Denny's wife. She passed away some years ago. Certainly miss her, but certainly loved her. Some of them. Spouses, Herschel Reed, his Herschel's not in very good shape health-wise, but Barbara Reed was one of these ladies that chummed around with this group. But Herschel now is at a stage where, she can't go because she has to have to help take care of Herschel, And so it's down to about 3 or 4 now.
Was John Peterson and Blanche part of that group? Or?
No, that John and Blanche was always a good friend, but no, Blanche never did get involved with that group for some reason. I don't know why, but that's kind of unusual too, because she's very much a people person too. And when John and I worked together in Arizona, he was the assistant for water resources, and so he was kind of our supervisor, So I got very well acquainted with John Peterson too, and anybody that's around John Peterson very long is going to know him. That's for sure, and I very much appreciate him. He's quite a guy, and he's still going strong. I mean, I don't know how old John is. He's a little bit older than I am, and I'm 78. So he's got to be up in his 80s, I'd say, probably
Certainly.
middle 80s. But he's still going strong. Just hadn't slowed down a bit.
Seems like it was a family affair, an extended family affair with the staff workers, staff and workers.
But these ladies, I mean, it was almost like an extended family. And they said, just because you guys are not going to these meetings anymore, we're still going to get together.
That's neat.
And so they'd drag us together. They'd drag us along. They were going to have the meeting. You guys can come if you want to. If not, well, we're going anyway. But I don't know if I can name all those guys or not. Ed Nelson,
Yeah.
Denny Burns, Herschel Reed, Gary Nordstrom, Billy Milliken, Coy Garrett. I'm probably leaving out one or two, but
Most of them were all state conservationists. At the same
or
time.
worked at the national headquarters.
Yeah. Herschel's daughter is now engineer in Virginia.
Is that
at
right?
RCS, yeah.
I very much appreciate Herschel. I never worked directly with Herschel, but you know, I just got acquainted with him. And a lot of it was probably because he and Linda and Barbara hit it off together, you know. And so, you know, we'd have dinner together or something like that, and, you know.
Wasn't he at the War College for several years in Rock,
Who,
Virginia?
Herschel?
Yeah.
He was state conservationist out in California. When you're talking about the work, you mean?
In Virginia? He was teaching out there after he retired?
I think he did, yeah. Herschel's, you know, there's several people that work for us that got doctorate degrees, but I don't have a doctorate degree. I've got a bachelor's degree. And there's a lot more like me that's only got bachelor's degree in our agency. But Herschel, there's a lot of them that's got master's degrees. And, you know, I've done quite a lot of work, you know, toward a master's degree, but I've never actually completed. But Herschel's one of the few that did get his doctorate degree.
Well, at any one point in time, did you have an opportunity to go to DC
Yes.
as a job, as
Yes,
a position, and chose not to?
I said, please, no. No, I didn't want to work in that zoo.
What job were you offered?
Denny Burns. Yeah. No, Denny, every time he'd see me, he'd say, Ron, I got a job in here for you. And one of the ones that he mentioned was, you know, it's kind of director of the Great Plains Conservation Program. He wanted me to come in there and hit that up. But, you know, you just get your foot in the door in Washington, D.C., and as people recognize you got abilities in whatever area, you know, you just kind of gravitate to that and move around. And if they find out you don't have those abilities, then you gravitate out of there, you know, that type of thing too. But there's good people up there, that's for sure. Always have been and always will be.
Was your dream job to be a state conservationist, or did you have a dream job? No?
No.
But you wanted to end up back in Oklahoma? Not
Not-
necessarily?
Not particularly, no. I was one of these kind of guys that, you know, after I did a job for a few years, you know, I just want to try something else, you know.
Just like your stepfather wanted to move again.
I guess so.
There you go.
Yeah, I blame him for that.
But 10 years versus 2 years is a little different.
There was somebody, and I can't remember who it was, told me this, and I think it was Denny. He said, you know, after you're in a job about 5 years, and you remember, you know how much Denny changed jobs. Denny told me this one time. He said, after you're in a job for about 5 years, well, you've done about all you can do. It's time you move on.
That's true.
Is that part of your reasoning for retiring from Oklahoma's job? And
No,
No.
not at all. No.
I was trying to do the math. At that point, you'd
You know,
been
the,
with 37, 38 years.
37 years.
37.
I don't know. In Oklahoma, I was enjoying the work. You know, I got tired of getting on a plane Monday morning and getting back on that plane somewhere in the U.S. on Friday afternoon. I mean, it just, you know, it's so much travel. And the other thing that happened too is that, you know, I knew I was going to retire sometime, and I was, you know, I had one grandson, and I wanted this grandson to get some experience beside, you know, there's nothing wrong with living in a subdivision, but I wanted him to get a feel for, you know, out in the country and wildlife and the resources out there, the grass and the trees and whatever, you know. And so there was an individual that was working here in the state office with us. His name was Richard Heiser. And he'd taken a job down at Fort Worth in the regional office, or they didn't call them regional offices then, but it's whatever we called them there. But it was the regional office. And I found out that Richard had bought an 80 out here between Perry and Stillwater. He hadn't done anything with it much, you know. It was just a raw 80, undeveloped. Didn't even have a good fence around it, so you couldn't. I think he did maybe lease it out for cattle, but after looking at that fence, I wondered how those little cows stayed in there, you know. But anyway, he owned that 80 out there, and I knew it was about time for me to retire, and so I wanted something to do, and I thought it would be fun, you know, I only had one grandson at that time, but hopefully, you know, I'd have some granddaughters or some grandsons, and I thought it would be fun, you know, having them out there on this place. And so I talked to Richard one day. I was down there at a meeting, and he was in the meeting, and so I just dropped a note on him in front of him as I was, you know, we weren't sitting together, and I said, I need to talk to you. And so after the meeting, we met out in the hall, you know, and I said, well, this isn't business, but I hear you've got this 80 acres up there in Payne County. No, it's actually in Noble County. Up there at Stillwater, I said. He said, yeah. He said, we've got that. I said, well, I was looking for some land to buy up there. And I said, I was just wondering if you and your wife are thinking about selling it. He said, Ron, he said, I am, but my wife isn't, so we're not. And so, I don't know, went along there for a while, and I was back down there to do another meeting. And so he drops a note in front of in front of me, he needs to talk to me. And so I stopped. He wasn't in the meeting, but he knew I was, and so he just wanted to talk to me before I leave. So I went by his office, and he said, well, we both agreed we want to sell that land. And I said, well, how much you want for it? He gave me a price, and I said, well, I'll take it. And so I bought that 80 acres out there from Richard and his wife. And this was in about, I'd say I retired last of 99. This was about in 98. And, you know, I'd started to work out there. You know, I'd built a big pond, about a 4.5 acre pond. And I'd done a lot of clearing with cedar and, you know, doing some work on it. I was working my fanny off out there on this place, you know. And then, you know, about this time, well, you know, the daughter and the son, I started having these other grandsons. And so we didn't have any facilities out there, you know, and you take the ladies out there, and they did not like, you know, going by in the brush pile or whatever, you know. So I decided that I needed to improve some of that. So I got me some plans from OSU for a pole barn cabin. Oh, before that, I decided to bring in electricity. This was about a half mile I had to bring this in. I decided to bring in electricity, and I brought in rural water. Back about a half mile where I was going to build this cabin. And so I had electricity back there. And so I decided to build this cabin. I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I just got these plans. You know, I'm an economist, worked behind a desk all my life. I'd nailed a few nails and I'd saw a few boards, but didn't know anything about carpentry or bringing in water and doing plumbing. Didn't know anything about electricity. But you can buy these manuals, you know, that keep you from getting killed at least, I guess. And now you got the internet. You know, if you've got a problem, you know, you can get on the internet and find anything about anything right now, it seems like. But, you know, I got busy doing that, and I think that drove me to retire also. I was just enjoying that work out there so much and, you know, start bringing those grandkids out there and seeing their little feet pitter-patter all over this place. You know, I built big docks out into this pond, you know, about from here to that wall, you know, stretch out there about 15, 20 feet. And I built several of those around so that, you know, these kids could fish. And we caught, you know, the fishing out there was great. Each one of them, you know, a lot of people are not deer hunters, but 3 of the boys, the other one, he don't want to kill a deer, you know, no way, you know, I'm not, he don't want to kill nothing, you know, and that's fine, you know, that's great. He likes to catch fish, but he don't want to shoot anything. But the other 3, 2 of them, they love to hunt, deer hunt. They hunt anything in season. The other one, he likes to go out there, but he might be, while they're out there hunting, he'd probably get over there comfortable and take a snooze, you know. He likes to be out there, but I mean, getting something's not his priority. But the other, they do enjoy duck hunting, you know, on the pond. They enjoy fishing. They enjoy deer hunting, dove hunting, whatever's in season and is out there. Well, they enjoy it, and they're the ones that's over at Owasso, so they're close. In fact, the one that's in school down at OBU was here this weekend. Him and my son, and he did a little archery hunting out there. You know, just didn't see anything, but you know, he tried it.
Well, do you remember your last week on the job? How you ended up?
How, my last week?
Or last day even?
Not really. In NRCS, during that time of year, there's a lot of people gone. You know, they save up their annual leave, and we're very lucky in NRCS. When I retired, I was getting 26 days of annual leave. That's 5 weeks in a day. So that's very lenient. I don't know if they're still doing that or not, but most people in NRCS seems like they'd save at least a couple of weeks during Christmas. And you'd find very few people down here during those 2 weeks. Very few. Is it still like that, Larry?
Still is.
And so, you know, I wanted to save my annual leave because you get paid for that annual leave, that whatever your rate of pay is when you retire. So here I am working down here, and I'm basically answering the phone if it rings. That's all I'm doing. There's nobody here except me. So that's what I remember about my first last week in working is basically sitting in here by myself.
It's quiet.
Very quiet.
I don't know if you realized it at the time, but the efforts you made on making that happen for that 50th, commemorating the first dam to come to the end of the 50 years in Cordell, and starting of the rehab program, and working with Congressman Lucas, and the detail going into DC for that whole thing. I don't think you realized at the time what that really developed into a whole new program for the agency. And
yeah, I was very proud of that effort. And this guy. we recognized, the Public Law 566 and the Washita work had meant to Oklahoma as far as, protecting resources and reducing flood damages and creating recreation capabilities, opportunities out there for people. The fish and wildlife benefits of those projects, it's just phenomenal. And some of those projects had been in existence, some of them were designed for 50 years, and they were approaching their 50-year life. Some of them were in better shape than others, but some of them were, it was pretty sad to go out there and see what shape they were. And if you had had a big rain in the watershed, they were not going to do the job that they were designed to do. I don't know if any of them were in any danger of failing, but I guess that would have been a possibility. But I didn't hear any possibility of dam failure. But I think some of them, if we would have known that, and if there was a possibility of failure, we probably would have gone out there and taken the dams out. We'd had to. But I didn't hear of any of that, so quite possibly we didn't have that. But anyway, we knew what the upstream flood control dams meant to Oklahoma and to people that were benefiting from that. And it was basically, you can tie that to everybody in the state that benefits from those structures. Well, we knew that there was going to have to be some work done on rehabilitating some of these structures. And Frank Lucas, our congressman from Cheyenne, I think he lives out of Cheyenne, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
But he's western part of the state. He actually has Payne County, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. He does.
Yeah, it extends all the way over here. Been our congressman for a lot of years, but I don't know who got to visiting with him.
Wes Watkins started it.
Was it Wes Watkins?
Mm-hmm.
But started visiting with Frank Lucas and talked about this issue with him. And that would have been, what?
97, 98?
97, 98.
Mm-hmm.
I got here in 95, so I was here probably about 2 or 3 years. So we started visiting about this with Frank Lucas, and he kind of took it on. He kind of took it on as a project to see if he couldn't promote this, at the national level to get enough senators and congressmen, to accept this as a good idea enough to pass some legislation in order to make this happen across the United States. Oklahoma has more flood control dams, Public Law 566 dams than anybody in the country, so it would benefit us probably the most, but there's probably about every state in the union would benefit from this. But anyway, I don't know where I hit on the idea that I've heard this guy talk about the 566 program and the need for rehabilitation and that type of thing. And I was very much impressed with how he went about that, what he had to say, how he said it. And he is a salesman. This guy is a salesman for this program. Very good salesman. And so, I guess I was smart enough to recognize that he could help us outside of Oklahoma. And so I can't remember if we promoted this down at the regional office, or I just took it directly to national headquarters.
With the Cordell, the 50th anniversary.
No, I'm talking about you getting this.
And from that, then it went to get up and work on the Hill to
okay.
educate.
But anyway,
senators.
I had this idea that if Larry was assigned, to Frank Lucas's staff for a while, that he could help him gather information and talk to people, both inside, Washington and outside of Washington. This guy's been all over the country talking about the 566 program. And you're still going today, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Still going today, doing that.
Just for the fun stuff.
But I could see that potential, that he could help sell this program. And so I was able to convince the chief to assign Larry to Frank Lucas's staff for a while. How long were you on that?
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half.
Almost 2 years.
And he worked directly with Frank Lucas and his staff, I guess, and gathering information on the 566 program and figuring out ways to not only Larry sell it, but I'm sure information for the staff and Frank Lucas to sell it, and probably other congressmen and senators up there on the Hill that were interested in the program, trying to sell them. I don't know what all he did, but he did a heck of a job. He did a heck of a job and is still doing a heck of a job, selling the 566 program and the rehabilitation work that's out there.
So Ron made that all happen. There was an awful lot of state conservationists that wouldn't let the state engineer go off and do their thing, but he was very good about.
Well, I saw that in Larry, that he could do that job, and I don't know, how do you recognize that in somebody? I don't know, but I did, and I was able to sell that notion, to the chief, and the chief's one that made it happen, but I was able to convince him to do it. So
All those management classes through the years, I guess.
I guess so. And you get on your knees sometimes, and beg. Oh, I'm kidding.
Who was the chief?
The chief at that time was Pearlie Reed.
He made it happen.
I knew a lot of the chiefs, the Bill Richards and Peter Myers and that kind of stuff, but I just met them. I didn't know them, but the only two that I really knew was Wilson Scaling and Pearlie Reed. That's really the only two that I felt like I really knew.
Well, Pearlie was Arkansas,
Yeah.
right? So
In fact, I was on the Chiefs Policy Committee when I retired.
Would they have 4? How many state conservationists was on that?
About 4, but he just pick and choose different ones, across the 50 states to serve for a period of time, and talk about different policies, how it was working, what changes needed to be made in policy, if we needed some new policy, if we needed to disband some policy or whatever, and we just talk about issues in the agencies and opportunities in the agency and how things were going, and good and bad, and if there was any bad. Thank goodness there wasn't too much.
well, by 1999, had many women joined into the agency?
Oh, yes.
By that
we
time.
had, in fact, when I retired, my boss was a lady, Judy Johnson. But worked with some super ladies as state conservationists and in other jobs too. I didn't see any difference in working with man or woman.
Well, early on it was mostly men, up until
Oh, yeah.
probably
Oh,
the
I'm sure it was.
60s, maybe 70s.
Yeah. It was, and
That's just the way it was, yeah.
yeah, well, thank goodness we got it changed. We're all better for it, I'll guarantee you.
Do you ever go back and take a look at some of the projects you worked so much on to make happen, and go back and take a look at them today to see the impacts?
Yeah. Yeah, you're always interested. I'd, when you get a chance, drive up Ogilvie Creek and see the channel work, see the dam out there, see the multi-purpose structure on Salt Camp Creek. I got to see a lot of Sugar Creek.
There's a lot of other
A
people.
lot of you, I'm sure you did too, Larry. When they had that channel they thought all the way done, and then they had that big flood over there. And you go down there and that channel is gone from looking like a channel to I don't know, that thing's probably 100 yards wide in places.
Or more.
Oh, it's
And
awful.
deep.
Those great big old tin horns sticking up out there, you know. Those are supposedly drop structures from the road, you know, down to you know, to get the water from the road ditch down to they were just sticking up different places. They'd washed in there. Oh, that was a
When they
mess.
named it Sugar Creek, it was aptly named. It just,
That's what I was gonna say, why was it called that? That's interesting too. Why sugar?
Because it would just melt when water.
highly
Okay.
erosive.
Yeah. Very highly erosive. It would just melt like sugar. Sand. A lot of sand. But that's sickening to see, you know, what we think we've got here, and then a big flood come down through there, and now what have we got? Got a mess. So, but thank goodness we didn't have too many of those, and right now I guess Sugar Creek's in pretty good shape.
Very stabilized. We got several stabilization structures up the channel now, so
Have you?
it's really stabilized a lot. But it took 50 years.
Mhm.
I got to say, Ron, during the tenure there, he made life and the job fun. He came around at a time when that was really needed, but everybody really respected him and supported him, and he allowed people to do their job, and that attitude and all just made all the difference in the world, and it really turned
Yeah,
the
for sure.
agency around. That was a good time in the
Appreciate
career of a
you
lot of
saying that,
people.
Larry.
That
But I
was-
did, you know, I don't know what kind of management style I had, but it was, communication was one of the main things that I worried about. Making sure everybody understood what the situation was, if it was new laws being passed by Congress. Understanding those laws, not only in the agency, but we work very, very closely with our partners in states, you know, our conservation districts and they've got a state association of conservation districts, and they've got people, very good people on those. We work with the Conservation Commission, and that's appointed by the governor. That's basically the state. And, you know, you've got executive directors. Some in Oklahoma, the executive director was kind of, you know, for both, you know, state association. I don't guess he was titled that, but I mean, he worked with both the state association of conservation districts and the commission. You know, the Mason Bungles and Mike Trolls. Those people were excellent to work with. Ben Pollard, I mean, I smile every time I think of Ben Pollard and working with that guy, because he was just super. Our engineering friend, the doctor. I'll think of it in a minute.
With the commission,
Uh,
Robert Toole was,
No. Anyway,
Dean Bollinger.
no. The doctor that worked in flood control with you a lot.
I should know that, shouldn't I?
John, worked with John Peterson a lot. He was chairman of that.
Call me up this morning at 2 o'clock when you think of it, yeah.
I tell you, when I'm at a stage where, you know, if I'm trying to think of something real bad, I mean, if I will just quit and get on something else, it'll pop right in my mind. Dan Siebert.
Oh, yes, Dr. Dan, yep.
See? If I just think of something else, Dan Siebert.
There you go.
He remembered a lot of names though.
Oh, yeah.
More than
But
several.
all those people, just super to work with. You know, all of the people that I work with on the commission. You know, Mason and Mike Trolls, but you know, the farmers, you know, that were appointed by the governor, basically farmers and ranchers and those type of things. You know, the George Stuckards of the country. Sandra Drummond, I think, was one of the Drummonds was on that for a while, but I can't get into naming them because I can't name all of them, and they all deserve to be named. But
Would you
those
have,
are wonderful group.
did you
people to work
have
with.
many interactions with the governor? One
Uh,
on one?
You know, when I was in Arizona, I had a lot of interactions with the governor. Arizona's a much smaller state than Oklahoma, and they're tuned different. I mean, Oklahoma is oil and gas, a lot of it. In North Dakota, it's farming and ranching, or it was when I was up there. Now they've discovered oil and gas, and you know they're going great guns up there now. But when I was up there and left in '95, it was you know, it was farming and ranching. And so you'd get a big notable into the governor's office, and he wanted other people at the dinner. And so I'd get a call. You and your wife are invited to, you know, dinner tonight at the governor's mansion, and you know, such and such, so-and-so will be the guest of honor, that kind of stuff. You just show up and eat dinner and say hello and go home, you know. But he just wanted bodies in there, you know, and he could introduce you as you know, working for farmers and ranchers, and you know, and conservation and that kind of stuff. So it was different states, different priorities, I guess. But in here, you didn't get that kind of.
Did you?
No. No, I won't name the individuals, but we used to go as a group into national headquarters, and we'd go in there basically to talk to our congressmen and our senators, and most of the time, I mean, these are farmers and ranchers from Oklahoma. These are this individual's constituents out there that's going to be voting for him, or, well, it was all him at that time. I guess it still is. But, so, I mean, most of the time they were treated very nicely. Come on in, we got a conference room, and I'll bring in some donuts, and I'll bring in some coffee or juice or whatever you want, you know. And we'd sit down and just have a good jolly visit with this congressman or senator, and leave feeling great, you know. And you know, I'd have part on the program talking about our USDA programs, and you know, if it was Mason Mungle or Mike Drawls or the chairman of the Conservation Commission, they would talk about issues that we would like to see some attention, you know, at the national level. Basically, we were lobbying. I mean, I can't lobby, but I was there. I was there answering questions, you know. There's no way I could lobby, but I was with that group, and they invite me, and I'd go. But there was one individual that we would go to his office, and he would never even say hello to us, because we were from agriculture. If we had been from oil and gas industry, I guarantee we'd have been met with open arms. But he would send a staff member out to the hall. He wouldn't even let us in the office. He would send a staff member out in the hall, and this guy would stand there, and we would talk to him, and he'd act like he's taking some notes. I won't tell you who that is. I won't name him.
Not on the record, you will.
After the record, I'll tell you. Anything else?
We've covered a lot. I don't know, is there anything else, Larry, you want to call?
No, I think that covered the gamut.
I keep thinking if you had made the decision not to go to Phoenix when they tried to talk you into here, things would have, you know,
No.
what would your trajectory have been like? We don't know.
I have no idea.
We don't know. It
I
worked
have
out
no
well
idea.
for for all
I
of us.
got to go around the horn, and I got to see some other things and meet a lot of great people and do some things. And you know, I've never regretted that, and I've certainly never regretted coming back to Oklahoma. I love this state, love the people, but you know, I've loved every state I've worked in too. Loved all of the work with some great staff. Thank goodness. I can remember I was involved in a few resignations, but I don't think I've ever fired anybody. I think I fired one guy, but I won't get into the details of that either.
I mean, that's a pretty good record too.
That's a pretty good record, you know, in about 12 years as state conservationist, and only firing one individual. That's pretty good.
And it all goes back to being called out of that one class that day.
It did.
You
I had
can
no
trace it back
idea
to
what SCS was, but yeah, it just, maybe that was in the Lord's plan. I don't know.
Do you remember which building that was in, or what class it was?
It was Rural Sociology 202.
So it had to be in
The classroom building?
classroom building, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
Probably classroom building.
Yeah.
But I don't even know if the classroom building still exists,
It
does it?
is, yeah.
Is it still there?
It sure is.
It was pretty close to the Union, I can remember it.
Yep.
It's-
It's still there.
It's still there.
It's still
And to
there.
think of that instance, and then the other one was the Fortran class.
Yeah,
that
that
just
Fortran.
little things have a big difference in your life. and
Just
career,
little things
so.
like that
Yeah.
have a big influence on your life.
Mhm.
But,
Well, then my last question is, when history's written, what do you want it to say about you? How do you want people to remember Ron Clark?
oh, I don't know.
Good golfer.
Well, no. I used to be a good golfer. I'm a pitiful golfer now. But I still enjoy that. And the main reason I like to go out on that golf course is I've always exercised. You know, I started running at a young age, always involved in sports, but you know, you get through that in college, and I don't know, I just felt a need to exercise. And so I was always a runner and a exerciser and that kind of stuff. But now I'm down to a point that walking is good exercise. I still do. I hurt my lower back doing crazy dives, you know, as a teenager, and I still have to do some things for my lower back. Just, you know, I don't know, it feels better. And so I do floor exercises every night, you know, sit-ups and push-ups and presses and that kind of stuff. Not many, but a few, just to keep my back loose. Question was,
How do you want people to remember Ron Clark?
oh, I don't know, as a friendly, fair individual that expected you to do your job. I couldn't take. We even had an instance here in Oklahoma. Probably don't need to get into that, but I could see that this individual needed something else to do. And I don't think sitting in that position, I don't think it's fair to the individual, you know. I mean, I wouldn't want to sit there all day bored, you know, would you? And so, you know, I think it's only fair to the taxpayer and to the individual that they give 8 hours for their day, for their pay. So I want them doing something. You know, and if they didn't have anything to do, well, I'd try to find them a job, you know. Other than that, well, good husband, good good father, good great-grandparent, great-great-grandparent with them boys, and a good friend in need. If you got a need, well, come see me.
Good. It's a good way to end. We thank you for sharing your stories with today.
All right.
It's great.
Oh, I was kind of dreading this, but I've enjoyed it. Let's do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.